Hi, my name's Tom Bartels, and I'd like to talk to you about how to grow food well. And by well, I mean growing a lot of organic food in a small space with the minimum amount of labor while improving the soil each year. In this video, you'll learn the most common mistakes people make in organic veggie gardening and find great ways to avoid that hassle. When many gardeners get started, they set themselves up for disappointment in several ways. I made many of the same mistakes too when I started out over 20 years ago. I'd like to help others not only avoid these mistakes, but practice some key techniques in their food gardens that will give them more food per square foot than they thought possible. And it's really not that hard. If you already have a garden, many of these same steps will help you supercharge your space to grow more than ever with less effort. Most of the techniques have been around for hundreds of years and are aligned with biointensive agriculture. But I've also added a few steps to optimize food growing for people who may not have a whole lot of time on their hands to tend to their gardens every day. So let's get started with the first step that most people miss: simple observation. Just go out into whatever space you have available for your garden, sit down and observe that space for a long while. Notice things. What's the sun exposure? Which way does the water drain into or out of that space? How far is it from the water source? Are there fences, trees, or buildings that might block that space during low-angle spring sun? Is the garden space convenient for access from the house? Interestingly enough, during a rainstorm, it's one of the best times to go out and observe that space, since you'll be able to see how the water flows across that particular landscape. Take some basic measurements of the space to see what kind of square footage you're dealing with. A good-sized vegetable bed can average around 5 feet wide by 20 feet long. If you have a space that big, you can make that bed number 1. Then, if there's space adjoining it, you can add beds of the same size as you progress. It's best to align the longer sides of the bed on a north and south direction. Many gardeners have over 6 to 10 beds in their garden with astounding variety. I've done up to 40 at once, and these steps work great at scale. But you should definitely pay attention to the second thing most people tend to miss: start small. By starting with a bed or two, you can manage the process and you won't get overwhelmed. You don't want to go headlong into building a big garden space only to run out of time down the road, or overwork yourself, or let the vegetables get covered by out-of-control weeds. You be the judge of how much time you want to commit to the project at first. It's much better to start out small and succeed than start out too big and give up mid-season. You can always add beds later on when time allows. So after you've thoroughly cased out your garden spot, you'll need to get a tape measure and get the overall measurement of the space available. You can mark it off with stakes and string to visualize what it will look like. Now that you've gotten more familiar with the space, come on inside, get a piece of paper, and diagram what the basic dimensions will be that you'll target for the beds. I'd recommend making each bed be that 5 by 20 foot dimensions for several reasons. You can reach across half the bed from either side for weeding. You can add a narrow 1 foot wide path between the beds to maximize growing space. The bed size of 100 square feet makes amending things more precise to estimate. If you're into season extension down the road, it's easy to put a hoop house over the entire bed. If you use biointensive spacing in the beds, it creates microclimate conditions that help in many ways I'll explain in a minute. Now, with your diagram of the bed or beds, you'll have a good idea of the planting space and you can start ordering some seeds. You might want to get on this soon so you can get your choices ordered and ready for spring planting. One quick note before you get into the seed ordering frenzy: you'll want to know a bit more about your climatic zone and how long your growing season is in your area. This will help you order veggie seeds that will work best in your local growing conditions. The easiest way to check this is through the USDA Plant Hardiness Zone Map. It's linked here. Or just do a Google search on USDA Plant Hardiness Zone Map. The success in your gardening efforts all start with the ordering of seeds. And there are several reasons why where you get your seeds can make all the difference. You want to order organic, open-pollinated, and heirloom seeds when possible from a reputable source. Don't go for the discount racks at the grocery store. Those are bottom-of-the-barrel seeds. I've got 5 favorite sites I like to use here. Any one of them will work for you. Plan on ordering only what you have space for, so block out your bed diagram to plan on different sections of your favorite varieties and only buy what you have room to plant. Order what you like to eat. Don't just have greens. You want some corn, beans, squash, winter or summer. They're all good starts. Tomatoes are a favorite, of course. Carrots are good for starters. If you order beans or peas, don't forget to order a packet of inoculant powder. This helps the beans work their magic with beneficial bacteria in the soil. These same companies sell all kinds of garden supplies as well as seeds. Now's a good time to order any garden tools you may need. And while we're on the subject, it's worth noting that quality tools may cost a bit more, but you'll be far better off investing in a few good tools that'll save you time than trying to scrimp and buy cheap tools that may impede your workflow. You'll need a good D-handled garden spade and fork. You want to get a hand-forged one if possible. Clarington Forge and Spear & Jackson are good brands. If you can't afford one right away, just use what you've got, but put one on your Christmas list. They're really good to have. You'll need a trowel. You'll need a sturdy garden rake, some sturdy garden boots for digging, and a garden hoe or a weeding tool. Although for smallish gardens, I find the best tools for weeding are your own two hands. I've gotten by for years without a hoe in a 600 square foot garden. The best way to minimize weeding is to use bio-intensive spacing on your beds, so I only tend to weed once a year. One key tip for removing grass, if you're going to cut it out and remove it, is to go deep enough to remove the entire root mass where the nodes are. If you cut too shallow, much of the grass will grow back. There are 4 general ways to prep for the garden where the grass is now. You can remove the grass by shovel by cutting it into a grid and then slicing down 7 inches and putting it aside to compost. You always want to compost grass upside down, by the way. You could remove it by sod cutter, which cuts about a 1.5 to 2 foot swath, about 7 inches deep. You can then rototiller that in the following spring. You can use lasagna mulch, which is layering newspapers, cardboard, and leaves over the spot to build a raised bed. This takes time, but it works well. Or you could use black plastic sheeting to kill the grass with solar heat over time and build a raised bed over it. Overall, I've had the best luck with flipping the grass in the autumn with a sod cutter and letting it die over the winter and then rototilling it in the spring to add all that dead grass as biomaterial for the first year. Depending on the condition of the soil you're starting with, you will most likely need to add some biomatter to it. You can amend with organic compost or soil builders that you can buy at the garden store, or you could use your own finished compost if you have it. You could also use what might be around your area for free, like old leaves, Excelsior, fully cured manure, they all work. Adding biological material to the soil adds in water retention, feeds the organisms in the soil, which then feed your plants, and improves the soil texture overall. You're looking for mostly rotten biomatter like finished compost. You want to avoid woody materials because they'll steal nitrogen and they'll take a long time to break down. Your ultimate target over time is about 6% biomatter in the soil. On a 100 square foot bed, it may take several wheelbarrow loads to make that happen. You'll want to do this amending during what's called a double dig of each bed to prepare it for bio-intensive spacing that works best for growing an abundance of plants. It is a fair bit of work at first, but well worth the increase in yields in the long run. There are short trainings on how to double dig a bed from various sources on the web, but basically what you're doing is separating the top foot of soil where most of the helpful bioorganisms live from the lower foot of soil that's more compacted mineral or clay soil. Then you'll fluff up the lower soil with a garden fork and add a small amount of amendment there before you add the top foot back on with the amendment in that layer. The main benefits of double digging are that it increases oxygen in the soil, it allows water percolation to lower layers in the soil profile, and both of these allow for greater downward root growth. It increases water retention and the plant's access to water during dry spells, since the roots are allowed to go deeper. And all of this reduces the need for the plants to grow laterally, competing less for their neighboring plants for nutrients and water. This allows you to plant them at higher density. This density also creates a canopy that completely covers each bed and creates a microclimate that retains more water, blocks out sun, and allows your plants to outcompete weeds. This all lessens your workflow in watering and weeding. These kinds of interrelated benefits get better and better as you use simple bio-intensive techniques. When I first changed over to bio-intensive gardening over 10 years ago, it would have been nice to have had someone to guide me through the process. I consulted a lot of books on individual subjects, tried various tips and tricks over time, and had to figure out a bunch on my own. Eventually, I did intensive training with one of my heroes, John Jevons, out of California. Combining that training with concepts from years in the home garden, I brought the technique to scale in a 4,000 square foot demonstration garden that I started from a lawn space. I found ways to minimize my labor while increasing yields in my home garden. I added the benefits of composting worms, chickens, simple drip feed automation, and some real basic support to the gardening relationships that make things easier each year. I built the steps in a modular way so I could add things as time became available, and the diversity of what I can grow in my backyard kept increasing. I don't know about you, but having the experience of growing large quantities of incredible food out my back door has been one of the most gratifying experiences I've ever had. I'm hooked. And most of the people I know that have gardens that yield like this are hooked as well. It's a very satisfying feeling. If you have questions about how to go forward, or you'd like helpful, more specific steps on how to do this kind of thing in your own garden, I'll be releasing a full video series on biointensive gardening this spring. We'll be covering everything from starting seedlings to winter storage of your veggies, and coaching people each step of the way. If you're interested in being on the Early Bird Charter Group and learning how to grow food well, enter your email below and I'll notify you when it's released. If you'd like some specific questions answered in the training, please add a comment below as well. Talk to you soon.